What are the three pillars of successful leadership? Today's guest, Robert Jordan, tells us the answer he learned from interviewing high-performing leaders. Robert is the founder and CEO of Interim Execs and a fantastic author. His book, Right Leader, Right Time, defines the three pillars of successful leadership, as well as the four leadership types. Bob Otis and I talk about the importance of resilience as a leader, the willingness to double down, and the right sense to do it at the right time. We also discuss the importance of leaders being honest with themselves and understanding where their skills lie and where their weaknesses are too. How do you know if you're the right person to take your business to the next level? Why are we naturally drawn towards authenticity the same way we're drawn to nature or to music? And what's the advantage to being a reluctant author? Bob, Otis, and I dive into all this and much more in today's great episode. Quick reminder to rate, review, and subscribe to the show wherever you're listening. You can also find the full videos of the show on our YouTube page. And if you learned something from Otis, Bob, or I during our conversation, make sure to share the episode with someone else so they can learn it too. This episode is brought to you by Tribe and Purpose. The transition from college to that first career is a difficult one, and it's even harder when you lose your sense of identity. If you're an athlete who just hung up the cleats, it's hard to go from being a rugby player to being Joe in accounting. We created Next is Best to help retired college athletes use their skills to create an impact through entrepreneurship. Next is Best by Know Your Tribe will help to smoothen that rough transition by helping you establish a clear sense of purpose, an actionable path to success, and the tools you need to manage your life. Your 20s are a confusing and chaotic time. Next is Best gives you the tools you need to make sense of the chaos and make this next chapter of your life the best one yet. You can learn more about Next is Best by Know Your Tribe at findyourpurpose.coach. And now, here's Cam and Otis with the show.
Hey, welcome to the Cam and Otis Show. On this episode, Robert, a.k.a. Bob Jordan, is joining us. He's a great author and an expert in the world of leadership. And that's what I love to talk about and dive in, and the who's, the whys, and the whats. Hey, Bob, good to see you, man, and great to have you today.
Thanks so much, Otis. It's a pleasure to be with you and Cam. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah. We didn't talk about that in the green room. This has been a long time coming. Hey, but I want to dive right into it. Who's your go-to, we'll call it role model for leadership? That guy or gal that you're like, man, I want to be like him or her.
Oh, that is a great question.
No warm-ups here, man. No warm-ups.
No, you're diving right in the deep end, and I appreciate that. That's awesome. I'll give you a couple examples. One is that we did a book I know we're going to talk about called Right Leader, Right Time. But before that, we had done a book called How They Did It, and it was a series of Q&A interviews with champion company founders, and I was fortunate enough to interview Joe Mansueto, who's the founder of Morningstar. Anybody knows the financial services firm Morningstar?
Oh, yeah.
He also owns, he loves publishing, so he owns Inc. magazine, Fast Company. He owns the soccer team in Chicago, the Chicago Fire. Joe is, if you met him at work, you would think you were talking to one of his financial analysts. Never had a big office, just incredibly modest, and this model of servant leader through and through. It's not a fake. I've known him for many years, and he, for me, is the gold standard of brilliant yet humble, and still accomplishing great things, and not giving in to bullies. As he was growing the company, he started it in his apartment. And I remember for the book, and then we did an audio program through Nightingale Conant with him, and just saying, how do you grow from, this idea you had in your apartment, to 4,000 employees? And so we had a lot of good information from that. And, one thing he said he wasn't the same person he had been when he started. He had kind of had to learn a lot and reinvent himself. But along the way, there are huge firms in financial services, and sometimes they're bullies. And, they don't like that the upstart has a better idea than them.
Right.
And, we all know we work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and it's hard. You have a good idea, boy, and somebody bigger could try to steal it or squash you like a bug. And he just quietly, he just kept on chugging along on his own game and growing and growing and growing. And I really admire that.
There's
awesome.
something we
know.
talk about a bunch, which is like I guess you'd say like the dichotomy of it as a leader, as an entrepreneur, that you know, we always talk about the protecting the baby, you know, this is my baby and it's perfect and that type of thing. But then that can also breed some, I don't know, some ignorance to the outside threats and those type of things, to where you are too focused on your baby, you know, drinking your own Kool-Aid type of thing. What have you seen in that dichotomy, or I guess in this specific example, how did he balance that?
Well, first of all, I think it's what you're getting at is a great point because to the outside world, it's always a black box. You know, it's always, you know, someone who's successfully grown a business, everyone thinks, oh, this is incredible, and it looks like it was so easy for them, you know? Well, internally, inside of that experience, oh my God, usually it's just a series of bloody wars, and you lost at least half of them. I mean, you were making mistakes right and left. And, you know, we did a bunch of research when we did the book, how they did it around that, and we had these rigid criteria to make it into the book. You had to launch, grow, sell for 100 million or more, or you had to go public at 300 million or more. So by definition, anybody we were talking to, wildly successful, far, you know, orders of magnitude away from average performance. And I thought, in a way, well, all that we're going to hear is just success after success after success. Not true at all. That's not what any of them said. All they had to say is, well, I failed at this, I failed at that, and not even prior businesses. You know, one of the standout examples was an MRI technology called tomotherapy. And when we talked to the founder, it was $1 billion valuation public company, okay? And the first thing the founder said was, you know, well, you have to understand, on the day we launched, the day we hired the whole team, their corporate partner backed out and they had to fire everyone. Like, you had to fire everybody on launch day? He said, yeah. And I'm thinking, I don't get it. How did you go from there to you're public? It's $1 billion. How do you? And that was a story we kept hearing over and over. And frankly, I realize people should take heart from that. We should all take heart from that, no matter what it is we're doing, which is, you know, keep going. Just keep going.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask you, because we've talked about this same thing before on the show, is that you know, one of the traits that nobody really talks about with leadership is perseverance, right? What do you do when you fail? Well, you got to get back up and go again. With all those people that you all have interviewed, all those lessons that you learned, is there a standout from them, or even a standout from a personal, you know, I fell on my face or whatever?
One of my standout heroes of all time is the guy who founded Biomet. If anybody listening to this show has an artificial hip or knee, or has a family member, anyone they know who's walking around happily, you have one person on earth to thank, and his name is Dane Miller. He is credited as being pretty much the founder. I mean, he's the founder of a company called Biomet, which is now part of a bigger company called Stryker. And Dane passed away a couple of years ago. But Dane started a company, and it was very modest. He was essentially going door to door doctors' offices selling arm slings. But he was into the biomechanics of the body. And he was one of the first engineers thinking about how could you replace the knee or the hip. And at the time, this was long ago, everyone thought the only material you could put in the human body was stainless steel. All right? Now, I had heard a story about Dane, and so I drove out. This is Warsaw, Indiana, which you can't get there from here. You can't get to Warsaw from anywhere. And I wanted to see him in person because I had heard the story. So I get into his office and I say, show me your arm. And the reason is that he had a surgeon in bed. Listeners aren't going to be able to see what I'm doing. I'm demonstrating graphically with Otis and Cam that he had. I'm pointing to my arm, he had had a surgeon friend embed a piece of titanium into his arm. This is when he had biomed for a couple of years. They had a plant, and a perfect storm hit. Tornado from the north, tornado from the south. Power cut off to the plant. Plant was going to be shut down for a week. He's bored. He calls his surgeon friend and he says, I'm coming over. And the friend's like, oh God, you're really going to do this. He has the friend embed a piece of titanium in his arm for 10 years.
This is modern Frankenstein stuff, man.
It is. Without telling anyone other than his wife and his daughters. 10 years he left it in his arm. Why? He wanted to prove to the industry that titanium was a better material for the human body than stainless steel. And now it's titanium. It's not steel. Steel will degrade in the body.
Mm-hmm. And I got titanium in me, so I can vouch.
You got some. So that to me is one of the greatest examples of somebody is like, how committed are you to the things that you believe? How far are you going to go with this? I love what Dane did.
That's awesome. I want to get into the authoring piece, because one of the things, and maybe this is because I was just listening to an interview with Stephen Pressfield the other day, and one of the things he talks about is once you start writing books, you keep writing books. Is that what's happened with you? Do you seek out the next book? And I won't get into his whole process that he was talking about, but to write a second book, I mean, write first book's no small task, but then to write a second book, how do you play that?
Otis, you're a nice guy, and I thought what you could have said is, do you seek out this pain intentionally? Do you want to hurt yourself badly, or it's actually book number 3, Right Leader, because what started for me was that I'm your classic entrepreneur. Okay, I've started or been part of dozens of launches, and at a particularly low moment, I was getting beat up by venture capitalists badly many years ago, and that Zen saying, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. By chance, I was at a conference, Inc. magazine, and I see this seminar on negotiation, for an hour. And I go in and I meet this guy named Jim Camp. He's a negotiation coach, and marvelous, incredible guy with this counterintuitive system. And he becomes my coach, and he saved me. He really did. And just an all-round kind of good coach. And he had this workbook for his clients on coaching, his techniques and rules and all of that. And I had a publishing background. My first business, I started the first magazine in the world that covered online and eventually internet. This was pre-internet when we started. But anyway, so I knew a little about publishing. I said, let me take your workbook and get it published. And we joked for 2 years. He said no, because the title of the book was Start With No. Anyway, a big publisher picked it up, Random House. And they published it. This is 20 years ago. It's been a bestseller ever since. It was translated into 20 languages. And Jim was just dear friend, mentor, coach, business partner. He passed away about 5 years ago, and I finally convinced Random House to let me do the audio version. So now there's an audible version of the book. Each book is its own head-banging exercise. And I don't think anybody in business should ever think of doing a book because you think you're going to make money. Let's be very clear here. That's not what's going to happen. It's either that you have a message that you are so bound and determined to get out into the world that you're doing it as an act of generosity, and or you're doing it because in business it's going to help advance you, frankly. And the first book, so Start With No, by Jim Camp, that was labor of love that it did pay. It was a bestseller, but it was just wonderful because it changed his life. Jim had been a secret weapon for his corporate clients, but then it put him on a world stage, literally.
Yeah.
So it's just, you got different motivations going on there.
What in your writing, do you find that it's more of a writing for yourself or with your friend to kind of untangle those problems and to tell that story? Or do you think it's more so like, I know something and I want to tell it? Which one of those two would you think best describes your approach?
Well, Cam, it's a great question. I think I would add a third motivation, which applied to me, which is selfishly, I thought I was going to be the number one reason. I was trying to absorb the learnings, the teachings from all of these people. And by doing the books, I was absorbing it on steroids more than anyone else. And so wanting to be a better negotiator in business, I was being coached by someone wonderful, a great coach, Jim Camp. But I knew that in doing the book, I was going to just be even more bulletproof. When we did the book, How They Did It, I wanted to absorb these lessons. I wanted the secret sauce. How is it that somebody can launch a company and do 100 times better than the average? I personally, selfishly wanted the lessons. And in the same way, the newest book was also getting at that in terms of being a better leader. Frankly, they're also, with Right Leader, was wanting to put out a message very clearly to people who are younger in their leadership journey, younger in career. Both the warning signs we've seen around leadership that doesn't work well, as well as this thing we call leadership style, where you absolutely can become better at what you're doing if you follow these examples. I guess really the reason I was asking that is because I think about I don't know, especially when it gets into the business and coaching and, putting it broadly into the self-help type, because even when they're not, I don't know, to me, it's a very similar category. It's just more application-based. But that you can see that when you go through something for yourself, and even in the way that you were saying, you called it selfish, I think it's a little harsh, but of absorbing the lessons, since you are actively absorbing the lessons as you're writing, to me, that creates the better product. And that's kind of what I was getting at, is the writing for someone else can kind of, I don't know, it's just like a podcast. When you're asking questions like you're somebody else, it comes off inauthentic. But when you're asking the curious questions that come up in your mind, it always creates a better flow that way. And I think that's really interesting that you were, going for that lesson of absorbing it, but then you were able to, because you were then synthesizing it, create that better product there. Yeah, I think you're 100% right on that. Yeah.
I'm thinking, it's in the same realm. I remember this is if you want to learn it, then teach it, right? Because it's a very similar thing. If you look at writing a book as preparing a curriculum to teach, I think back to my career as a rugby coach. I had no idea about the game, when I started, zero. And having to continuously learn and put yourself in that mindset of continuous learning and what's the next thing, and then sharing all that information with a bunch of young men.
Before you go
on, that's
a
perfect example of this.
Do you guys think?
It really is. I mean, I think,
Sorry, go
in
ahead.
terms of having purpose. What's that?
No, I was saying go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I just think, in order to have purpose in life, I think you have to challenge yourself. I mean, who wants to be bored? And so you throw yourself into rugby, not knowing rugby. I work with a guy, one of our businesses, and when his kids got into playing soccer, he said he became the coach. I said, that's great you did that. You played, He said, I've never played and I have no idea. He said he went and got some books on soccer and strategy and all of that. And I thought, okay, that's an act of love, but that is also, that's putting yourself out there.
Oh, yeah.
And 4 of his rugby books that he studied are holding up my laptop right now to give me this nice, pretty angle.
See, they continue to provide value.
Oh, yeah. But what I was going to ask was, as we're talking about this, it kind of reminds me of something I've heard before when it comes to leaders, but then I think you hear it more specifically with like politicians, that it's like anybody who wants to do that probably isn't the right person for it. You know, if you want to be the leader, then you might not be the right person, because then it means you're there for the wrong reasons. Almost that we want that reluctant leader. Do you think that's a similar type of thing when we talk about authors, that you should almost be the reluctant author, that it's, if you're going there for the egotistical reasons, then you're going to get the worst product, but if you're going there to, you know, untangle your own mind or absorb lessons from someone else, then you can get the, you know, a better product on the other end? What do you guys think of that?
Yeah, I buy that. I think that the sense of something coming off authentically that can be more genuine is it's not necessarily polished. It's not necessarily the thing that was completely prepared for. This is a loaded example, but I'll use it anyway. Elon Musk was in Chicago. I'm in Chicago. And at one point he addressed a big audience. And this is years ago, pre-Twitter and all of that. He was easily the most inarticulate speaker, this group of host speakers, presidents, and all of that. He was easily one of the most inarticulate people to ever be asked, you know, on a major stage with thousands of people. And I thought it was one of the most wonderful talks I'd ever heard. Because the opposite would be that if you hear a politician or a head of a major corporation, literally some of them, they show up and there's a teleprompter in front of them, or they're reading from a script and it's like, oh God, why did we, they literally could have phoned this in. It's that level of boring and safe and predictable, and we're learning nothing really. And you know, this opposite was a completely uncanned approach.
How do you bring that philosophy, I think is the way to put it, of authenticity to your clients? And, you know, show them that, help them, you know, step up, if you will, to be that servant, humble leader.
I think it's a great question, and I have been playing around in my own head with something around this. So you can tell me if you think this is crazy. I don't know if this is a well-formed notion. The famous author Oliver Sacks, a psychiatrist, and he said, the only two non-pharmacological ways you can alter the brain, any of us, is nature and music. And you think of an experience you have in nature, and whether that definition for you is hiking a mountain, being in a forest, whatever it is, there's something that happens between you and that, an ocean, that is, it's authentic for you. It's beyond, it's not a conscious thing how you react to that, but that's, to my way of thinking, something that is authentic. And it's in the same way that you have music that you love. You have music that moves you. It's beyond you consciously. It's something that connects you with that artist or that music. And I call that authentic. That, to my mind, is authentic. And I think we're all in this challenge, which is that in our work, what do we do that gets at authenticity? How do we become more authentic as leaders, and how we present to everyone else on our team to end up at this thing called trust, real trust. And so I just love those examples. I'm not sure I'm even articulating it the right way, but I feel there's something there to explore.
This episode is brought to you by Tribe and Purpose. If you're a college athlete who just hung up the cleats and you're looking to make an impact as an entrepreneur, then Next is Best by Know Your Tribe is perfect for you. Get a clear sense of purpose and a path to success so that you can make a bigger impact and make this next chapter of your life the best one yet. Learn more today at findyourpurpose.coach. Now let's get back to the show. No, I think that's really right, because what you're talking about with nature and music is that just like kind of natural connection, that kind of gut feeling. And when you're around people that you really trust, you know, friends, family, that type of thing, it's very much the same feeling. So I think you really hit the nail on the head with that, because it's when you stop being authentic and you start thinking rather than doing and those type of things, that's when people can kind of start smelling the BS inside the organization, those type of things.
Yes. Yeah. In Right Leader, Right Time, we talk about these 4 leadership styles, very distinct. But at the same point, we said, well, we also see these three pillars or commonalities among exceptional leaders. And one of them is we called it leaders who don't hide. And what we mean by that, an opposite example kind of makes the point. A few years back, Wells Fargo got into trouble because they had this practice of cross-selling and it boosted their revenues a lot. Someone had a credit card, they'd open a checking account. They had a checking account, they'd start a mortgage, and it proved to be an illusion. There were millions of accounts that had been set up falsely that the customers had never agreed to. And it ends up, and they haul the CEO in front of Congress. And they're saying, what of it? You were promoting on quarterly earnings calls for years. This was the number one, the chief way you were driving revenue at Wells Fargo, and it was false. What of it? And he said, well, that wasn't me, that was the board of directors. Now, anybody with half an inkling around business knows that's not the purpose of a board, and there's no way a Fortune 500 board that was what they do. Boards are about governance and succession around the CEO and strategy and M&A. They're not around the marketing plans of the company. That was an executive who was hiding. And after that, at some point, he was banned for life from banking, as he should have been.
How did you, or let me rephrase that. The small business, that founder, how do you help them? I think that's probably the best way. Help them understand that, and to reference our friend and guest also, Lisa Rosenthal. She was a great example of this. Hey, I may not be the right CEO to go from 80 to now. I see her as an anomaly. I really do. How do you help those leaders? Really, let's not call it the leader. Let's call it the founder. How do you help those founders come to that self-realization that I'm not a failure. I'm just not the guy who goes from from 80 to 150 or whatever.
Well, first is the realization that it would be more rare to be that person who does, that in the vast majority of the times you're not alone if you could realize that you not necessarily need to step aside, but look at these examples. Bill Gates, we never would have heard of Bill Gates if he wanted to keep on saying he was the greatest coder in the world. Because if he had, Microsoft would have been a very tiny business that went nowhere. But instead, what he realized was he had a head for business. He could hire programmers who were better than him. He could collaborate with partners like Paul Allen and Steve Ballmer, who in their own right were very powerful presences and leaders. And so he could grow an organization. And, just because you're a programmer doesn't mean you would know how to negotiate with IBM to convince them to allow your code onto their PC, thus making your company one of the greatest, in the modern era. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little here, but it is to the point that most founders cannot do it all and they cannot handle all stages. And so, entrepreneur is in some ways a different way of saying someone who does a really great job of delegating or of figuring out resources that are stronger than themselves. For that founder that cannot give up anything, good luck, because you are facing limitations on growth and you're definitely heading towards burnout at some point.
I want to flip this to the other side there, because we talk about the holding on for too long. What have you seen, Bob, for somebody letting go too early? And what does that look like in a business as far as a founder who maybe jumped the gun a little bit? They should have stayed on a longer time, and that turmoil hurt the business.
Well, the leaving too early, that's harder for me because the examples we look at of massively flamed out or massively successful, they definitely had to have longevity. Persistence Otis, to your prior point, is a very necessary thing. We write a lot, though. We wrote a lot, though, in Right Leader, Right Time of really inspiring examples of leaders who did figure out how to get out of their own way. So one of the leaders we talked about, he's a leading thinker in what's called content marketing, right? So we now all live in a world of search engine optimization and being found on Google and all that. This particular entrepreneur runs a web development company. And he realized at some point he was not the greatest sales guy. He was, up 20 hours a day, running a team of 30 people, developers and all of that, trying to make all of the sales. But his real love was writing and blogging about content marketing and search optimization. And he did a courageous thing. He fired himself as CEO and hired a CEO. In a way, he got lucky because he had a client who he started hitting it off with, and he could tell that this guy could be the CEO for his company. And so this particular leader went from CEO, 30 people reporting to him, making all the decisions, slow growth, no sleep, fires himself as the CEO, still owns the company. Okay, let's be very clear. He didn't walk away from a valuable asset, but he gave up control. He has exactly no one reporting to him anymore. He is arguably the world leader at writing and thinking about content marketing. He has many followers because he's just brilliant on the subject. And oh, by the way, his blog and his videos are incredible lead generation for his web development business. He's not a dummy. Did a really smart move. But firing himself as CEO was key to kind of unlocking his business to grow beyond what it ever would have been.
And that's
Isn't that courageous?
Oh yeah, that's what I was going to say. That's a tough decision to make too, and a risky one, right? Because what are you doing? You've controlled everything, and now I'm going to let somebody else control it, And
Sorry, just in case any of your listeners are jumping up and down because I was being too coy. His name is Andy Crestodina. His company is called Orbit. You don't have to, well, I'm sure he'd love for you to go to Orbit. But if you just look up Andy Crestodina, you're going to see one of the most remarkable people in his field and this specific expertise in terms of writing and coaching on content marketing.
And that's
he's also for an example for us of one of the other pillars or commonalities we write about in the book is doubling down. He started kind of as an undifferentiated entrepreneur. He had an idea for web development. Well, there are tens of thousands of companies out there that do web development, right? But his particular thing was that he was gaining more and more insights into content marketing. It's not just enough to put up a website for any of us. You have to know how you're going to be found in search and to stand for something, right? To have a voice. And so he's this example of kind of relentlessly doubling down into his expertise, even to the extent of limiting his own power within his company.
I think that's a really key thing when we're talking about like how to make the decision as a founder is you got to think as far as like that self-selection process of being an entrepreneur and going to create something. If you went to go create the business, it's because you have the skills most likely in that creation process, whether it's the coding or whatever that background is. That's probably a pretty good indicator that now you might have other skills. You might want to, transition to more CEO than founder and keep it moving that way. But you got to think of where your skills really lie and go back to your skills because there's a reason you were able to start that company successfully. And it makes me think to, advice that Dad, you gave me probably would have been a year and a half or so ago around the time when I decided to stop working with Verby. And one of the pieces that you told me was, well, you can go apply that somewhere else. The things you did, the genius you had, the fun you were having, all of that kind of stuff, whatever label you want to put on it, that was still there, and you could just go apply that to another area. And I think that's the important switch for founders is that there's a reason that you got here, and that skill is still good to go use somewhere else rather than banging your head against a wall trying to learn how to, learn admin and finances or whatever else.
I want to jump on something, shift gears a little bit, and talk about business interim CEO. I'll be honest with you. When I first looked at that, I was like, "What? Like, how can?" And then I started thinking, as I digested it more, I thought, you know what? That's the Army. That's the military. Because you come in as the leader, and it's a very finite period of time. Then you're gone. And then the next one comes in, and then the next one, and the next one. Is that the model? Not that you use the Army as the model, but is that kind of the thought process of, let me provide you some expertise at this level, the $100 million level sort of thing, and grow you to 150 and then next, or what? How do you frame that business model?
Yes. So you're referring to interim execs.
Yes, sir.
And we are this kind of global matchmaker. Organizations show up, they have a leadership need, CEO, CFO, CIO, those kinds of roles. And, the claim to fame is that it's operational leadership. It is absolutely around decision making. It is not the same thing as consulting. It's not just advisory where we're going to say something, but God help us, we would never execute or implement on the work. This is where you have to dive in and do the work. This is something that did not exist 50 years ago. This is new. In a way, I got to say, I think it's an offshoot in a way. There was a thing called business process outsource 30 years ago, right? All these cables under the oceans. And so now all of a sudden you could have a call center in India or Indonesia or wherever, and you could have coding teams around the world working 24 hours a day. So everybody said, oh, well, the call center, sure, we can outsource that. Well, fast forward to today. Yes, you can outsource the CFO function. You can outsource the CIO function, and it happens all the time. And it's not necessarily full-time. There's also fractional resources, which especially apply to growing companies. A small company that needs a smart person in a CFO role, you can't afford a full-time CFO, but these days you don't need to, because thank God now there's these fractional CFOs out there, and you have a bookkeeper and you want a great CFO to look at your reporting once or twice a month. Cool. You're growing faster. You're starting to raise funds. You got to negotiate with banks. Got it. You can get a CFO in to help you. And this is absolutely a good thing of the modern age, that there is this new kind of career calling for people. It's, I guess you could say broadly, it's part of the gig economy,
Yeah.
Do you think that there's any other executive roles that you would see changing like that in the future, as far as, and just to throw out another one, maybe COOs, that you can manage that in different areas, or I don't know, any other role that you could see fracturing into different companies like that?
Well, they all do. I just didn't want to shock you, but CEO and COO, they are all now, or can be, project based. This happens every day of the week. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're in case of interim execs, we started what became interim execs 15 years ago. We developed a concept called Red Team. Red stands for Rapid Executive Deployment. Over the 10 years or so of Red Team, we've been approached by about 7,000 executives from 50 countries in every aspect of C-suite you can imagine. And so that's how we ended up doing the book, is because we started ranking and scoring and screening executives, and we spotted both a not so great pattern, which is that the majority of the executives showing up on our doorstep, their careers, their leadership journeys were okay, but not great. Mm-hmm. And if I was summing up the error in one thing, it was attempting to be all things to all people. It doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And the flip side was, when we were just looking at and getting to know the top 2, 3, 4%, oh my gosh, remarkable, exceptional executives. and we saw these 4 distinct patterns, what we call leadership styles, that were remarkable. And that's why we felt like we had to write this book, because the cautionary example needs to be told to somebody younger. And somebody along the journey should know other people have done this before you, and there actually are patterns here that you can follow to be more successful.
Do you think that, and without throwing out the so the hypothetical that comes to my mind is sending CEOs to work in these different businesses in order to get more of an acumen of what different industries may be like and get those different perspectives? Because what it sounds like you're hinting at is that being one, like you said, trying to do everything for your business rather than, being specific is a key piece there. But the other piece that I heard was that the variance of it sounds like it provides an advantage to people. Because if you're only a CEO of one business for 20 years, 30 years, then transitioning somewhere else, you're more specific in your skill sets. Whereas, throwing out the hypothetical, you have 2 years to go bounce around and you do a CEO gig every 3 months and you're bouncing like that, you can gain so much extra expertise and perspective on that. Is that something that you would agree with?
Well, just to be clear, Cam, the idea of portability here is kind of one career path. I mean, the majority of people are, for the foreseeable future, the permanent employment is permanent employment. The folks like at Interim Execs, Red Team, they're portable in the sense of moving from engagement to engagement, but they're taking that expertise with them. Mm-hmm. And the more confident and accomplished they become, that becomes more and more focused, not diffused.
Okay.
And that's what we see among successes, is that particular unique leadership style they have becomes more and more specialized, and therefore of more value to the world and to the companies that they're engaged in.
I want to ask you, how did you and Olivia become partners? Were you seeking out a partner? Was it the dude? She was the dude that was sitting next to you at some conference, and you started talking over a cup of coffee. And it was like, hey, we got an idea.
She's going to hate me for answering this question, but I'm answering the question because you ask great questions, Otis. So the somewhat involved answer is that I had heard great advice from another coach, a guy named Dan Sullivan, a program called Strategic Coach. And Dan had always said that, you want to have a longer and longer career. If you don't want to be kind of pre-programmed that you have to retire at some age, it helps to hang out with younger people and to have younger cohort. If all you do is hang out with the cohort of everyone your age or older as you move on in business, good luck, because you hit a certain point where a lot of those contemporaries or olders, they're retiring. Mm-hmm. And no offense, but they're losing their purpose. Mm-hmm. And they're not as engaged in the world anymore the way that they were. And so if you want to be longer and longer in career, and my wiring is I'm not retiring. Okay, I don't play golf. It's not going to happen. So I want to die with the sword in my hand. Okay, so if it was going to be that way, then particularly the teams I'm on, the stuff I'm invested in, there had to be some sense of recruiting younger people with piss and vinegar. And so the concept for interim execs, I'd already been an interim executive and had some success. Lots of failure, but I've been in 3 IPOs, and I was the lead guy for some early stage companies that sold for really high, ridiculous multiples to strategics. So I wanted to go fund this idea of interim execs, and I specifically wanted to recruit some folks who were straight out of college. And I recruited Olivia out of college 15 years ago. And eventually we became business partners in interim execs and co-authored the book, Right Leader, Right Time. She's going to hate that I told you that story, but I'm telling it anyway.
There you go. Well, she was a young whippersnapper at the time, right?
She was a young whippersnapper. She's now a relatively young whippersnapper.
She'll always be young, right? I mean,
exactly. Or younger, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that, and thank you for sharing that, because there were some great points in that. And matter of fact, I'm going to use that.
Well, one thing for anybody in a smaller business is you need to reinvigorate energy. You want fresh energy into your company. Leadership style is one thing. We think you need to look at collaborating with folks that have completely different capabilities from you. But the other is recruit younger and take a risk. Now more than ever. I mean, there are all kinds of brilliant young minds out there with tons of energy. Go use that.
Oh, I agree. I mean, I can flash back to my days of I was in the Army, but that was piss and vinegar. It was like, hey, oh, you need somebody to go here? Yep, that's me. Yep. Oh, yep. It was very much that sort of attitude. And yeah, there's a reason for that, because you're at that point in life where you're discovering. And I think that's a great point. And that's what I was just going to say is I had another couple that I was looking for what I learned, but I love the age cohort thing. I really do love that, because I think that's we always see what we want, and we see ourselves in what we're looking for also. And I think about my two hunting partners that are retired, and I throw business things at them, and they're like, yeah, blah 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 blah. So those conversations don't happen with them anymore, because they're retired, right? Yeah. They're hanging out at the beach, and just the fact of
so Otis, you don't have to give up those hunting partners. You need another hunting partner group with some folks where it's still the piss and vinegar.
There you go.
Well, I was going to say facts. I was going to say the example we've joked about this before on the show of myself and our other business partner Norman, our producer, how he'll come in and go, "What are we going to do about all the space junk flying around Camden?" And I go, "I don't know, but we got to drop a business plan right now." And it's just that energy. There's something to be said for it.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Have you finished that?
It'll be on your desk on Monday.
All right,
it involves a lot of lasers.
Problem solved. Lasers is an interesting idea,
There you go.
Just got to figure out how to make them work.
I'm not stealing it. Get the patent. It's okay. Yeah.
Cam, what'd you learn?
I think this is something that I think we had all probably intuitively heard before, but Bob, you put this so well, just leaders who don't hide, and how that's such an important leadership trait of, be able to be the one to, take the brunt of your mistakes and even your team's mistakes, because really it goes back to you as the leader. And I just love the way you put that. And that's such an important piece of being able to, stand up there. I think it was Wells Fargo, you were saying, just being able to stand up there and take the flack for something that your organization was doing. Because really, when you get down to it, without going too far into the tangent, about CEO pay and those type of things, the reason they get paid such exuberant amounts is because they take the fall when things like that happen. And that is a trait of just leadership of you got to be able to, not hide when those things get bad.
Awesome. How about you, Bob? What'd you learn today?
You've renewed my appreciation. I'm classic entrepreneurial foundings, but the further I've gone, things get a little more corporate and private equity oriented and all of that. You've renewed my entrepreneurial zeal. So thank you.
Oh, I love that. You're gonna create some new businesses coming up. That's here we go. Stay tuned, folks. Bob will be back with some new business ideas he's got. So Bob, in between now, when you come back, how do folks find you, learn more about what y'all got going on with Interim Execs, the next book, the current book?
Thank you. Thanks, Otis, and thanks, Cam. I can be reached at interimexecs.com.
Easy. Love that. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Bob. This has been great education and great reminder that just because I'm old doesn't mean I have to hang out with old dudes, right?
No way. Thank you, guys. It's been an honor.
Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank y'all for listening to the Cam Otis Show, and a special thanks to our guest, Robert Joyner, for joining us today. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to pass along to someone else so they can enjoy it too. Make sure to follow the Cam Otis Show on Facebook and Instagram, and you can watch full videos of the show on YouTube. While you're there, make sure you hit that subscribe button as well. And as always, the full archive of our episodes is available at www.camandotisshow.com. Thanks again, and we'll see y'all next time.